Hi folks, welcome to my Bit Retro Journal. Today I'll be doing a video on my PowerBook 180 in celebration of Marcintosh, which is a YouTube hashtag event where we basically celebrate all things Macintosh from the 80s and 90s. And I'm really excited this year to actually be able to do it with a real Macintosh. I got this last summer and fixed up the screen in a few videos, and it's got a beautiful LCD screen now with no tunnel vision. And in my first Marcintosh video on March 4th, I demonstrated the cable that I got that allows me to hook it to a monitor. And I showed you screen mirroring. What I didn't realize is that I can do the following as well. I can actually move the menu bar. I discovered this accidentally. And upon reboot, when I did the mirroring, I was getting 640 by maybe 400 or whatever the resolution is for the LCD. But by moving the menu bar, I actually get the full 640 by 480. And the reason that's important is because today I'm going to be doing a video on running the Amiga emulator, the 68K version on the Macintosh, just to show you that the Mac could run the Amiga emulator and just see how well it could run it. I need minimum 640 by 480, and I guess you can see right now that's actually showing you all the stuff on the bottom here. I need 640 by 480. It needs to be 256 color, which is what I have this set at. The LCD only gives you 16 color. And you can see that now I have a full screen going. And so this says RAM doubler is turned off. And yes, because I actually turned on virtual memory because the Amiga emulator needs 10 megabytes. And this machine actually, unfortunately, only has 4 megabytes, so I haven't done much upgrading with it yet. This screen here is still active, so if I move my mouse, you can see the cursor is there, but I'm going to mainly focus on my 640 by 480 color display. In fact, I'm going to close this screen up, since I don't need it anymore. And then I'm going to move my camera so that you can see this better, okay? And then I'll show you the Amiga emulator, so let's do that. So I've got it booted up and set to the screen, giving a pretty good picture. What I'm going to run today is the UAE emulator for the Macintosh, specifically for the 68K Macintosh versions. I'm going to close my windows because I like to keep things clean. I have it under emulators. You can see I still have lots of disk space free. And we have lots of emulators to play with. I like playing with emulators because obviously I wrote my own, which is not really it's a ROM emulator. It's not really a true CPU emulator, but similar. But you can see here is the UAE 0.6.0 version, which I got, I think, off of Macintosh Garden, but there's also the Mac repository. And when you get it, you actually get it with this fat version, and this fat version is pretty big. Yeah, it's 1 megabyte in size, and this 68K version, which you don't get, is only half that size. And the reason why is because in the fat version, since this started happening during the PowerPC days, they actually stuck the PowerPC code into the same executable. And the way they did that is in the original Macintosh applications, you actually had what was called, well, in the file system on the Mac, you have both a data and a resource fork. In most operating systems like Windows and Unix and Linux, you only have a data fork. In fact, they don't even consider it a fork because you just have the data part. And that contains all text and from a document, but it also contains code for an executable. It just parses it differently, sometimes depending on extensions, sometimes depending on what few little bits at the header of the file it might see, or in the QL sense, it has something actually on the header of the sector that says it's an executable. That makes it special. On the Macintosh, they actually had two separate parts of a file. And in the resource fork, it contains all the icons, dialog boxes, text. You can go in and edit it and change it to localize it to a different language. And then all the code exists in there. When they came out with the PowerPC side of things, they decided instead of adding another resource element, let's just stick it right into the data fork and have the PowerPC, the operating system designed for the PowerPC, which, system, I don't know what system it was, 8 or 9, would be able to see both of them. Well, it could read the PowerPC into memory and executable code and run that. I actually split it apart because I like to have the smaller file. So this, again, is only half the size. And so the way I've done that, actually, I can do this pretty easily in a single command, which is my command shell, which I designed and wrote back in the early 90s and designed after the QLs with a little bit of Unix intermixed. This predates Linux. I can run a copy command where I just copy the attribute. So there's three parts that my copy command can copy. It can copy the resource fork, the data fork, and the attributes. The attributes are the things like how much memory does it need, what's the type, and what is an executable or a data or whatever. Again, I can open this up again. You saw it right here. The kind information is so I don't have on my emulator. I have a special info extension that shows that it's that's an application and etc. That matches, so it gets the right icon in here. But this is attribute information too, how much memory it needs, and I can simply do that in my command shell. I'm going to start this up since I have enough. Just to show you that I do have virtual memory turned on, and I have a 10 megabyte block for free. So just allocated a total of 12 megabytes, and I can probably reduce my system size because it's running like the fax and modem stuff. Probably don't need that. I should probably go in there and optimize it a bit. There's some tools here as well, which I haven't really explored yet. But I think it's for trying to grab the ROM image. I actually have the the Kickstart ROM. Originally, when I first started this, I actually accidentally grabbed the QL Kickstart ROM. So there's a QL emulator for the Amiga that has its own ROM. And maybe I'll show you that at one point. But this is the Kickstart ROM. I think it's the 512K version of it. You have that, and then I have an ADF file of Workbench 1.3 here, and that's all it needs. It's got some readmes, which are off the screen. But what I don't have here that I have elsewhere is I also have the source code for UAE, and what I want to do is I want to use my favorite, it's been compiled in Code Warrior. So what I want to do eventually is recompile UAE under ThinkC on my PowerBook 180, and then see if I can play with it. Because as you'll see today, the emulator is a little slow. So let me start it up. And again, this one's compiled for 256 colors, you need 256 colors minimum and 10 megabytes of memory. There is another version of UAE 0.5.0 that only requires 8 megabytes, but requires more colors. I forget how many it needed, 16,000. But it also talked about how you could recompile it with less. So that's why I really want to try to recompile this under my own compiler, because then I can have some control over it and see if I can do any optimization. Again, purely for fun, since I think the reason they didn't optimize this particular emulator is because the PowerPCs were coming out and they were so much faster, and so that's why they also had a PowerPC version of this, and I'm sure that it runs so much better on a PowerPC running at higher speeds than a 33 megahertz 68030. Although I will say a 33 megahertz 68030 ought to be able to run an Amiga decently, not super fast, but you're running a 7 megahertz machine on one that's almost 4 times faster. At least it ought to run at maybe close to the speed, if not half. I realize the Amiga has a lot of specialty chips, but I don't think this, one of the problems with this emulator is that it was not designed. It's basically emulating 68,000 and 68,000, and so that's a little problematic. And you can see that it's slowly coming up, and it's going to give you the famous Amiga disk here at one point, and then I just have to go and pick the drive and have it boot up, and some of that's going to take a long time. And so there are ways to optimize it with settings, which I've already played with, but I think here it comes. But yeah, so it's not as fast as it could be, and to be honest, it may not even be usable at this point. But I want to play with it to see, as a hobby, how fast could a 68K Macintosh run an Amiga under UAE? Because we've seen that Shapeshifter and the other AMAX do pretty well running the Amiga. I think I've tried to run AMAX on my Amiga 600, which is just a 68,000 7 megahertz machine. I think Shapeshifter, the reason it runs it faster is because it actually doesn't double emulate. And again, I'll at one point show you the QL emulator on Amiga 600. I've already done a video on it. It's just coming out later, where the emulator, a 7 megahertz machine running a QL 7 megahertz machine actually runs faster than the QL because they basically just modified the kickstart ROM and are letting the emulator literally run on the processor. And so that's something that should be able to be done on a Macintosh. Still have to deal with the support of the specialty chips that the Amiga has, but the base code of the 68000 ought to run as fast. And so that's something I want to do as a hobby, is to see if I can take a look at it. If you look at the notes of the Amiga emulator, the early version, it even states that, you know, if there's interest, that's something that the person that was doing it was going to look at. Obviously, there was never any interest because the PowerPCs took over, and, you know, the history of the Macintosh is well documented. I love the 68K Macs. I was a huge fan of the Motorola 68000. That's one reason I like the QL and the Amiga, and why I like the Mac that I have. Here you go. We have and so let me, I'm actually using the trackball because the mouse is on the other side of the camera. But so then you can go, and again, some of the things, you can change the video. I have the resolution at 320 by 256. I could take over the whole screen. It does say the smaller resolution is faster, so I'm going to keep it that size. Frame rate, yeah, so here you can actually change the frame rate. It'll make some animations quicker, and so I'll show you how that is. Use Quick Draw. I've used it and not used it, and if I have this setup, not using Quick Draw works, but when I turned it off and then tried to, so there is a way I can boot this directly off of my laptop, even though it doesn't have 256 colors. It won't work in 16 colors, but for some reason it'll run in 4-color mode, 4 shades of gray. I don't know why. Maybe it's a, you know, maybe the relationship of how memory is organized. Well, it will run in 16, but what happens is this picture, my mouse doesn't show up. This picture of the disk gets squashed to half the screen and is inverted. If I run it in 4-color mode, it's still inverted, but I get the whole screen. And then when it boots to Workbench 1.3, you basically get, it looks like Amiga Workbench 2.0 because it's black on gray. So it's kind of cool. But again, not designed for that. That's why I want to recompile it to see if I can actually see if 16 shades of gray can actually work, so I can run directly off my laptop without hooking it to a monitor. But so the GFXlib is just sort of using, I think it's an Amiga library, graphics library implemented here. But they say that, you know, Quick Draw is the most compatible. If you don't click it, it's a little faster. I didn't notice any speed difference, but the frame rate, and I'll demonstrate how that works. I'm not using extra memory because I'm already using virtual memory. So also realize that this is not running in 10 megabytes of real memory. This is running in virtual memory, which is using the disk. So it's already going to be slow to begin with. So I don't have any extra memory for this machine. There's lots of things I need. Obviously, you can hear the drive whirring unless I use Audacity to get rid of the whirring noise. You may still hear it. I want to get a SCSI drive, but they're so expensive. So I don't have the funds to do all the things I want to. Plus, I actually haven't opened my PowerBook up yet, and I'm worried about, I mean, I did open up the screen, but I haven't opened up the main case, and I need to figure out how to do it safely. Maybe use a hairdryer to heat the plastic a little bit so that I don't break any of the standoffs. Right now, it's in pretty pristine condition, except it has a real SCSI hard disk in there, which I want to replace it with either Blue SCSI or one of the SCSI replacements. Certainly not SCSI to SD because they're too expensive. I mean, unlike IDE, the SCSI stuff is just outrageously expensive. You know, IDE you can get for $4, but unfortunately, these machines were made as SCSI machines. You can create a hard file for it if you want and share Mac and Amiga folders, and then debug is nice because when it takes a long time, like if I want to do anything right now in the Finder, it's going to take a very long time. In fact, I don't even think it's updated the screen to show you that I have a disk here. If I put it in debug mode, it pauses the emulator and then I can go about and do stuff, which makes this experience a whole lot faster. So I appreciate they put, it's almost like pausing the emulator. And you can turn sound off, joystick. If you turn screen updates off, it goes a little faster, but then nothing updates on the screen. And then this is the about window. Tells you who wrote it. 9596, Bernd Schmidt. Again, the mouse disappears because there's no mouse in there. So I'm going to choose drives, insert in disk 1. And I have Workbench 1.3. And then this will start going. But I think it does take quite a bit of time to, you can see the disk finally updated. So it was in some state. Again, if you've seen some of my other, Macintosh videos, I've done a lot on multitasking in the 80s, comparing the Amiga, the QL, and the Mac was I love operating systems, and multitasking is very important to me. I obviously recently did a GUI video, which got a lot of views, and some comments that people weren't happy with the way I rated things. And again, it's just my point of view. But with multitasking, the Macintosh has a flawed, in my opinion, cooperative multitasking system. And the reason they did that, I think it's synonymous to writing an interpreter versus a compiler. Writing an interpreter is really easy to do. I've written many interpreters. Writing a compiler, it's not impossible, but it does take more effort. And so I think writing a cooperative multitasking kernel is a much easier task than writing a preemptive kernel. And so give the Amiga's exec kernel and the QL's QDOS kernel credit, and especially QDOS. If you haven't watched my comparison videos, it was like two plus years ago. I highly recommend you watch them. The audio is not so great, but still good videos. And I want to get back to them and actually do it on real hardware, because I did it with emulators because I didn't have Amiga back then. But it demonstrates to you that both the Amiga and the QL have really good kernels. And again, my opinion with my testing, the QL has a slightly better kernel because it really was trying to mimic Unix. Back in the days, there's a whole set of papers in the QL World magazine where that, now here it goes. And we now have the actual Amiga DOS startup screen. Again, it takes a bit of time and the text is really small. I could enlarge this to the whole screen, but the point here is just to demonstrate to you what it looks like. And what I've learned so far is, it seems pretty compatible. It doesn't crash or anything. But in any case, when the hard disk here in this area didn't show up, it's because as this was waiting for the disk, it wasn't giving back time to the Macintosh operating system. And so that's something I can easily fix, because you just have to sort of fire off a wait next event. So again, wanting to recompile this in ThinkC and getting this to edit, I can improve it a bit. Obviously, I want to also speed it up. And so we'll see if I can. I mean, I love just the fun of recompiling someone else's source code in a different compiler. I've done this. There's a video coming up in the future on my QL where I've actually compiled Drystone in my small C compiler and got it to work. It's not fast at the moment in terms of Drystone, if you don't know, kind of is mapped to the compiler. So it doesn't just show you how fast the machine is, but how fast applications can be created given the compiler you're using. And so I need to figure out how to optimize the compiler a bit. But so I love compiling source code using it. My favorite compiler is ThinkC on the Macintosh, because that's where I developed all my stuff. It's an ANSI compiler, so it should eventually work. I hadn't used CodeWarrior. I think I got out of the Macintosh world when CodeWarrior came about. And I want to use real hardware, so I have like a 60 megabyte disk. I don't have a CD drive, and I think CodeWarrior is about 300 megabytes in size. So I think I'll stick to ThinkC. So that'll probably be a summer project to recompile the UAE emulator for the 68K Mac. And then, we'll see. Maybe I'll put it on, maybe I'll make some changes. I'll put it on GitHub. And since there is a resurgence of 68K classic Mac fans, I mean, you can obviously run WinUAE. You can run these Amiga emulators anywhere on a Raspberry Pi. So it's kind of pointless in the sense of resuscitating this. But at the same time, I think our hobby is kind of pointless, right? Because what else are we doing other than, sort of reliving old hardware that we could easily just get a cheap laptop and run rings around it. So I say whenever somebody says you're wasting your time, my comment is, I want to. That's the whole point. I want to spend a little bit of time with my retro gear, wasting time and reliving how things were. Sometimes understanding that as primitive as things were, they weren't as primitive as we think. I'm probably going to fast forward over this part because it's getting, it's going to take a little longer to read all the disk stuff. And I'll have to go into the code eventually to figure out if that can be improved. And right now, it's also hitting the disk, so the virtual memory isn't helping. So let me get to the actual start screen for, Amiga, for Workbench 1.2, and then we'll continue. So here we go. Okay, I have it finally booted up, and you can see that I opened up a PowerShell, and if I type in it, I mean, it's slow, but it's kind of workable. But it's unfortunately not linearly like that. And I guess it depends on how the Amiga has been implemented. Because if I do a directory listing, I think it takes a while. I'm actually already multitasking something here, so I wanted to show that for you. And again, the mouse moves very slowly. Like I said, this is not, but I'm gonna bring this down, and you can see that I have a bouncing ball going on, and in fact, It's bouncing slowly, but it is animating, and if I want to, I can actually also turn on the sound. I turned it off. And of course, turning the sound on, it started the hard disk on. But you can see it plays the audio for the sound, and then you can also play around with. So here's where you can try to make it seem a little choppier. If you want to go 7, you can see that it'll jump. Hopefully it means it's doing it quicker, but you don't get the smooth animation that you otherwise get. They claim that putting it at 3 is the best, but the audio doesn't seem to align with. So here we have kind of a choppy bouncing ball, but yeah, at least it does animation and multitasking and everything. Now again, if I put it at 1, let's give this a try. Let's see if we could magically slow down time or speed up time. I'm going to let this run for a bit, and I'm going to just do a fast forward on my video just to show you a smoother animation. Here we go. So it looks like the emulator, at least the graphical part, if you speed it up, then it starts running normally. So that's so this emulator is running about 1/16 the speed of an Amiga, at least with the graphical ball. Maybe with everything else, it may be. I don't think it's a 16th of the speed, but because Amiga has specialized hardware for graphics, maybe that's where it's slowing things down. But I'm going to wrap it up. As I said, I am going to take a look this summer about seeing if I can recompile the 68K version using ThinkC on my Mac, and if I can then figure out ways to improve upon it and how it's running. But still, we can emulate the Amiga 1995-96 software on a Macintosh. So, that's pretty cool, and it seems pretty compatible. So I'm going to end here. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time.